everybody. On behalf of the American Federation of Teachers, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar with Julie Harris-Stern, Teaching Big Ideas for Real-World Transfer of Learning. My name is Kelly Booz, and I'm the Manager of Resources and Dissemination with the American Federation of Teachers, and I get to oversee Share My Lesson as part of that. All right, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Julie Harris-Stern is really an all-around amazing person. She is an author. She's the Share My Lesson, American Federation of Teachers Share My Lesson content lead, instructional coach, mom, blogger, wife, and also one of my really good friends. So I'm very excited to be able to moderate this conversation with Julie. So Julie, I'm turning the controls over to you. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, depending on where you are. Loving this international audience I'm seeing in the chat box. So I just put a fun picture of me with my two boys because just to have a different picture than the one in my bio, but then I realized I'm wearing the same shirt. So I don't know. I don't wear that shirt every day. So anyway, I hope we have some fun here. I hope you guys really interact with us on this webinar, especially because you are participating live. So my first question, my poll question for you is, why did you sign up for today's webinar? Was it the idea of transfer of learning? The promise of efficient use of time and students not forgetting things that you taught them? The term big ideas? You're familiar with my work? Or none of the above? So now I'm going to click in the little box should pop up for you guys to submit your answer. So the separate box should have popped up for you to submit your answer. Why did you sign up for today's webinar? So those of you who answer quickly, hit submit and then type in the chat box, you know, why you joined today, especially if you chose none of the above. But even if you chose one of the other ones, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? We have Sophie from Norway. We have people from China. What time is it in China? Okay, let's see. So the majority are here for the idea of transfer of learning. Awesome. The promise of the efficient use of time is one or two. Great, the term big ideas. Great. So this is just for you. This is not going to be a poll, a public poll that you have to submit, but I just want you to be mindful. How engaged will you be in today's webinar on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being, and I'm a mom of 2 small kids, so no judgment if you're going to be multitasking or half listening. A 5 being all in, I'm ready to make an actionable plan. So you can let you guys know, let me know, or actually don't let me know. You guys just decide how engaged will you be in today's webinar. And you'll see if you want to be at a 5, I'm going to have a bunch of times where I say, here's an actionable idea, and I'm going to give you my email address for you to email me, and I can give you feedback if you want to go through all of the actionable idea steps. So select a standard, a specific content topic, or a learning objective. If you're not at an IB school, you can select a statement of inquiry, a central idea. Select something that you want to play with today if you're like all in and you want to make an actual plan. Here's my next poll question. How do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? So a 1 would be, I have no clue what this means. And a 5 would be, I can teach my colleagues about this. So how do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? So go ahead and submit your answer. 1 would be, I have no clue. 3 would be, I could give a decent answer to this question. 5 would be, I could teach my colleagues. And if you answer quickly, go ahead and tell us in the chat box why you selected the answer that you selected, or what your response is to this question. I see somebody's a PYP coordinator. That means primary years program. Oh, you attended Lynn Erickson's workshop. Great. Yep. She's one of my mentors. All right, let's see. All right, we have a range. I love this. I love the person who could teach their colleagues about this. Awesome. So we have a range, but somewhere in the middle. That's good. It's okay if you have no clue. I hope by the end you will have a much better clue. So these are our learning intentions for today. We will understand that conceptual understanding provides structure for better retention of facts. So even if you really want your kids to remember what it is that you've taught them, conceptual understanding will help you do that. And it allows students to transfer their understanding and their learning to novel situations, to new complex situations. Conceptual understanding is the secret for both of those things. We're going to use a 3-step process to build a unit for deeper learning that transfers to multiple contexts. So if you're all in, get ready for this 3-step process. Get ready with a particular content piece that you want to play with, and you can send it to me via email for feedback. Okay, here's the next poll question. Do you sometimes feel like we are spinning our wheels with outdated curriculum that will not prepare our youth for a rapidly changing world? I'm just curious where you guys are on this. Yes, I often feel this way, somewhat, or no, I never feel this way. So go ahead and submit your responses. And to those who finish early, please feel free to go open up the group chat and let us know why you selected what you selected. Do you sometimes feel like we are spinning our wheels with outdated curriculum that will not prepare our youth for a rapidly changing world? Yes, somewhat, or no? And those of you who feel no, yes, we have some people who feel no. Please email me and tell me what I'm doing wrong, because I often feel like we're not preparing our students for a rapidly changing world. Those of you who feel no, maybe it's because you teach at an innovative school, or maybe because you stay off of social media. I'm not sure, but I would love to hear from those of you who say no. Those of you who say yes and somewhat, you're with me. And so that's, you know, a big preoccupation of mine is how do we prepare kids to solve complex problems? So here's a picture of my grandmother. And if you want, you can enlarge this PowerPoint. If you click on the sort of rectangle icon, you can enlarge the PowerPoint if you'd like. So here's my grandmother. She was born in 1913. This is a picture of her at my wedding. So she was 93 years old at the time, and she was a teacher. Teaching has changed a lot since she was a teacher. So for her, there was fixed intelligence. There were the smart kids and the dumb kids, and you pretty much knew by around kindergarten, first grade, which kids were smart, which kids were not. And intelligence was fixed. There was a lot less diversity. My grandmother taught in Louisiana during the age of segregation. So there's a lot less racial diversity in the way we sort of typically think about diversity. It was about quantity of school. If you didn't get it, you just repeated. You either, went to Saturday school, summer school, you repeated a grade level. The teachers didn't change how they taught. You just got more school. She had pretty simple techniques. She went to Grand Coteau College, and when she was 23 years old, that was it. She didn't need any more professional development. She didn't attend too much ongoing professional development. And finally, there was a set knowledge and skills. She knew what the kids needed to know and be able to do, and she just sort of passed that down. So what I'd love to do is hear from you guys just in the group chat box. Which of these things do you think has changed the most since my grandmother was a teacher? How has teaching changed for you? So you can go ahead and write comments in the chat box if you'd like. I hear somebody say a curriculum should focus on the real life situation and problem solving. So you're talking about sort of set knowledge and skills. All right, some people are talking about how they use current events to teach. Awesome. So teaching and learning has changed a lot. Life has changed a lot. I read a statistic that said just the front page of the New York Times today contains more information than somebody in the 18th century would encounter in a lifetime. Just the front page of the New York Times has more information than someone would encounter in a lifetime. Also, virtual reality. I don't know if you guys keep up with a lot of the predictions, but here's just a few predictions. By the 2030s, virtual reality will begin to feel 100% real. We'll be able to upload our mind or our consciousness by the end of the decade. That's one of the predictions. By the 2040s, computers will be 1 billion times more capable than humans. Nanotech foglets will be able to make food out of thin air and create any object in the physical world at a whim. And I love this one. By 2045, we'll be able to multiply our intelligence 1 billion-fold by linking wirelessly from our neocortex to a synthetic neocortex in the cloud. And so these are the type of things that I'm always sort of reading about, keeping up with, and thinking about how that impacts schooling today. So this is something that Tom Friedman talked about during, like, probably 10 years ago maybe even 11 years ago at the IBM Forum. He said in the 20th century, most professions needed to remember. So that top sort of box there, learning to remember. Routine professionals, manufacturing, unskilled labor. There were very few jobs where people needed to transfer their learning, like inventors. And he's saying, you know what, the 21st century, all that is shifting. We have way more jobs where people need to transfer their learning. Entrepreneurs, creative professionals, inventors. And so learning for transfer has become more important for educators today than it was for my grandmother. How many of you feel like you can relate to this? Just feeling like you've got a low battery and everybody's got demands on you, you've got a stack of things to do, you've got coffee next to you. I want this to be interactive, so if you guys want to go ahead and you can chat in the box, like feel like this relates to you or not. And so what we're having to do as educators is we went to school with people like my grandmother teaching us, but we have to figure out how to synthesize how much the world is changing and figure out how to teach kids about this new world and prepare kids for this new world. And so it can be very overwhelming. Yep, I'm seeing, oh, Lexi Greer, good to see you. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying, yeah, this relates to you. Like your life is just sort of overwhelming. But I like to show this picture of my grandmother. This is my grandmother dancing at my wedding with her cane in the air to Lady Gaga. You guys know the song, ya, ya, ra, ah, ah. I turn around and everybody's cheering because she's like pumping her cane in the air, 93 years old, dancing to Lady Gaga. And I just thought, wow, if my grandmother can enter the 21st century with such gusto, then I can too. And so she's an inspiration to me of really just trying to really reinvent myself and embrace sort of the complexity of life. How many of you know who this is? I'm waiting to see if anybody says who this is. Elon Musk. So my editor emailed me one day and said, Julie, I just read this blog about Elon Musk and how he's able to innovate. He's the owner of and creator of Tesla and now SpaceX. He says he deconstructs knowledge into fundamental principles and he applies those principles to new fields. So that's basically what conceptual understanding is. We have to take our curriculum, break it into the fundamental principles so that kids can apply those principles to new situations. So this is basically what this is about. So this is kind of the overarching question I hope you guys will be able to answer. I asked you in the beginning how well you could answer this question. How do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? How do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? So first I'm going to start with just what is a concept. For those of you who say, I don't have any idea what this question means, let's break it down. What is a concept? A concept is an organizing idea that contains attributes derived from examples. It's timeless, universal, abstract to different degrees. For example, change is a concept. It's an organizing idea. We can think of a lot of different examples of change. Habitat is also a concept. So that's a little bit less abstract than change, but it's still a concept. Even rainforest is a concept. So getting a little bit more specific, less abstract, but it's an organizing idea that's derived from examples. So I want you guys to reflect, how close is this to your current understanding of concepts? So you can go ahead and type, ooh, cool, some people are already typing it. So somebody's saying it's a universal, transferable, big idea. It's a big idea. System is a concept. Yep, awesome, cool, we're going to talk about systems. So this is a tool that I often use with students so they can understand what the concept is. So I have on one side, what are examples of concepts? And on the other side, I have what are their attributes or characteristics? What makes that change? What are their attributes or characteristics? And so let's go through an example of something I've used with grade 3 students on habitat. So this was at an IB school, a PYP school, habitat. So an example would be rainforest, desert, and ocean. So those are 3 examples of habitats. So I'd show students pictures or illustrations. I've even had a school do where their whole grade 3, they formed the classrooms into these 3 examples. So they tried to bring in as many objects. They brought in sand for the desert. They even brought in space heaters for the rainforest and the desert to make it really hot in there. A teacher brought in an aquarium that was in another science lab for the ocean so that they could see sort of what are these different habitats. I see somebody saying the Freyer model. Yeah, the Freyer model works really well for this. And so based on these examples, the rainforest, the desert, and the ocean, kids can start to say, it looks like a habitat is a unique environment that supports plants and animals, and those plants and animals depend upon that unique environment. And so kids start to see what a concept is using something like this concept attainment. Yay, Linda, this is fantastic. She'll use it immediately. Great. You can even take these concepts and go even deeper. So right now, rainforest is an example of habitat, but rainforest is also its own concept. And so with that, I would show students what are examples of rainforest. I show them the Amazon and Borneo and the Congo. So these are all examples of rainforest, and say, hey, what do you think makes up a rainforest? What are the characteristics or the attributes of a rainforest? There's a constant temperature, usually pretty warm. There's a high amount of rainfall, and there's lush plants and tall trees. So those are the things that make up a rainforest. Those are the attributes or the characteristics of a rainforest. So this is just a simple exercise that I use to help kids sort of understand what a concept is. How do concepts impact retrieval of information? So that was my first question for you guys, and I hope just that quick little example shows you guys the answer to that question. My key point here is concepts organize information and enable easier retrieval. And so most kids sort of walk around with their brain looking a bit like this picture. And we want their brain to look a bit more like this picture. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. And concepts lets them do that. So we sort of gave them like an organizing idea such as a concept. Then they could sort of file away rainforest, desert, ocean, Amazon, Borneo, Congo into these sort of mental file folders. Here's some examples of subject area concepts for science, social studies, concepts in text, writer's craft, and reader's craft, just so you guys can see what some examples are. I also have my website that should be in the resources section, a link to my website which has resources and has a lot of examples for mathematics, for science, for music, for social studies, so you guys can see what I mean by some of these things. I also want to mention, I forgot in the beginning too, if you follow me on Twitter, so my Twitter handle is Julie H. Stern, if you're into tweeting, or even if you're not, if you have a Twitter account, if you follow me on Twitter and tweet during this session, I'm going to choose a couple people at the end for a free book, and I'm going to mail a free book to you, or you can choose to come to my summer workshop in Washington, D.C. So if you want a free seat to my workshop, you can do that as well. So just a quick note about Twitter, if you guys want to follow me and tweet about this session. So again, to our big concept, our big question, how do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? So let's go back to our rainforest example. So what I like to do is transform the classroom into a rainforest and have students really sort of experience, and this I got inspired by doing PYP inquiry, have students really experience a rainforest and say, what kind of plants and animals might live here and why? What kind of plants and animals might live in a rainforest and why? And have the kids sort of hypothesize about that. So the brown spider monkey is one of those that lives in the rainforest. The brown spider monkey is called a spider monkey because his tail, he uses his tail almost as a fifth arm, and he stays high up in the trees. Most monkeys come down onto the ground to look for food and things like that, but this monkey lives most of his life high up in the trees, and he survives off of the berries in the Amazon that are really high up in the trees. And so I asked the students, based on that, what is the role of habitats for plants and animals? And so this is my sort of split for the IB, for those of you who are working with IB schools, is instead of telling the kids the central idea or the statement of inquiry, I like to ask them questions. What is the role of habitats for plants and animals? And students, give them a sentence stem so they can sort of, play with it. I understand that habitat's blank for plants and animals. And then really important is the grounding it in the fact base. For example, and so if you guys want, you can take a stab at that. Habitats provide special homes for plants and animals. For example, the brown spider monkey stays high in the trees and depends upon them for fruit to eat. So that's an example of something that was a big idea that we want students to come up with. what type of systems might be found in a rainforest? So then I'm shifting, I'm using my same context to sort of shift to build more big ideas for the students. So now I'm shifting to looking at the concept of systems in a rainforest. And so this is an example of the tree system in a rainforest, the emergence, the canopy, the under canopy, the shrub layer. I tell students, wow, way down here at the shrub layer, it's dark. And the noise from the insects is deafening. So I sort of play some of that noise for them so they can hear what it's like to be way down at the bottom of the canopy under the shrub layer. And so what happens when we change one part of a system? What would happen if we, for example, cut down the emergence or cut down the canopy? What would happen? What happens when we change one part of a system? And so the resulting big idea that I'm trying to build at here would be a change in one part of a system brings a change to other parts of the system, creating an imbalance. So I'm bringing in a new concept here of imbalance. So how is this a transferable idea? Here's a reflection point for you guys. How is this a transferable idea? What other topics can relate to this big idea? A change in one part of the system brings a change to other parts of the system, creating an imbalance. Can you think of other ideas that relate to this? There's tons. Back to our brown spider monkey. Do you guys think that this guy is in the wild by looking at this picture? He's not. He's in captivity, and most kids say because of the rope. He's in captivity because he's critically endangered. Almost all of his habitat has been destroyed. 80% of his habitat has been destroyed. He's a critically endangered species. And this is the island of Borneo, which I showed earlier in the example of just over the years how much deforestation has devastated the rainforest in the island of Borneo. So then I ask students, what's the relationship between human actions and habitats? So I'm constantly building and folding on these big ideas through the same context of rainforest and habitats. So I want you to understand that human actions what on habitats? And then for example, so they can say human actions lead to consequences on habitats. I understand that human actions lead to consequences on habitats. For example, the brown spider monkey's habitat is being demolished. So then I can transfer to a new context, oceans. All right, we're still studying habitats, but I'm going to a new context because the big idea is about human actions and habitats. So we transfer to oceans and we look at the problem of pollution. We look at the problem of the number of endangered species based on plastics and getting into the environment. And so we're able to transfer to this context. We're still looking at, okay, we're using the concept of pollution, but we really want students to understand this big idea of the relationship between human actions and habitats. And what's the relationship between those two things was really what we're deepening and refining each time we return to this question. So then we can layer on something more complex, like transportation and energy use. We can layer on how humans have a more indirect consequence on habitats by looking at transportation, energy, and the burning of fossil fuels. And so even for third graders, having them see that we can build on this and have more of an indirect impact on habitats helps them to make that connection with climate change and with global warming. So again, what's the relationship between humans, finite resources, and other living things? So I'm layering on more with these questions. And I see somebody already saying this in the chat. Humans can responsibly or irresponsibly share finite resources with other living things. So we can have a positive or a negative impact. So what I'm doing here is taking two concepts and making them into a big idea. And so that's what I've used Understanding by Design by Wiggins and Matai, who talk about enduring understandings. I also like to use big ideas because it's more universal. And so it's Erickson's formula for making big ideas. You take two concepts and you state them in relationship to each other. And that's how you come up with a strong big idea. So here's an actionable idea that you guys can use if you want. You can identify at least two concepts to your selected content standard or objective, and then ask, what's the relationship between those concepts? So if you want to be playing with this, you can do that. So here's our 3 steps. You write a big idea, or what I call a conceptual relationship. You turn it into an abstract conceptual question, and then you use fact-rich context to illuminate basically the big idea. And so that's my three-step process. So I want you guys to reflect. I'm going to give you a few seconds to do that, and you can type into the chat box if you want to. How did we go through this process with the habitat example? So basically, what I did was, I asked you the question, what's the relationship between human actions and habitats? And then we went through what I'm calling the conceptual inquiry cycle. So I have a big idea, I turn it into a question, and then I take students through specific context, repeatedly coming back to that question so that they can deepen and refine their understanding along the way. And so students that I've done this, I worked with a school, it was an IB school, International Baccalaureate School, and they had the students then transfer their understanding to the Arctic and the warming of the ocean in the Arctic, because they slowly built up this level of complexity and what can be done about the warming of the Arctic, which is a problem that we currently don't really know how to solve. And this one teacher came out of his classroom shouting for me down the hallway to say, come and hear this level of responses from these third graders about what can be done in the Arctic, because they had layered on gradually and over time how humans can have an impact on the environment. And so here I'm going to give you the sample. This is from my elementary book, Statements of Conceptual Relationship. And here's my problem with those of you in the United States with traditional standards. The left-hand side is I got from traditional standards, such as students will understand the persuasive features that advertisers use. And I have to ask myself, what are the persuasive features that advertisers use? And do teachers just use the textbook or Google or their own ideas to come up with that? Or this is a math one. Students will understand the relationship between the base 10 numerals and number names. Or here's a science one. Students will understand that there are different kinds of matter. So if we take those and we say, what are the concepts that are there, and try to give it a big idea, an enduring transferable idea, we can come up with things that are better, such as students will understand that advertisers use persuasive features, such as catchy slogans, which is a concept, captivating images, which is another concept, and simple but attractive logos, which is another concept, to hook consumers. That's why they're doing it. That's sort of the point. Or students will understand that each digit of a 3-digit number represents amounts of hundreds, tens, or ones. That's from the Common Core. Or next generation science standards. Students will understand that observable properties help us to describe and classify matter. And so I hope you guys can see how much stronger the right-hand side is, because we took those concepts and we stated them in a really strong statement of relationship. So if you want, you can make a strong statement of conceptual relationship, a big idea, based on your content. And so then once we have the big ideas, we plug it into the conceptual inquiry cycle. We turn it into an abstract question. And so based on those big ideas that I just showed you, we can ask things like, what persuasive features do advertisers use? How and why do they use these persuasive features? What's the relationship between customers and persuasive features advertisers use? And so my favorite question is simply, what's the relationship between this concept and this concept? That's the easiest way to come up with a question. So I came up with these question stems just to sort of help us. Once we have our big idea, we can ask, what's the relationship between this and this? Or how does this concept impact this other concept? Or why does this concept create or determine or whatever this concept? Or what is the role or purpose of this concept in this concept? So if you like, you can write a question about the relationship. And so, again, even if you're watching this on demand, if you want to email me, if you want to play with this, you can email me, and I'll give you some feedback. And so this is how I used to think about teaching. I had my subtopic A, my subtopic B, my subtopic C, and then I gave students a test on A, B, C. That was how I used to teach. This is how I think about curriculum now. I have my question of conceptual relationship that leads to my big idea, and then I bring them through a context that's pretty familiar and easy to understand, and then I bring them through a little bit more complicated context, and then I bring them through a more complicated context, and even through a further complicated context. And so this is how I think about teaching now, and I can see that teaching is much deeper now that I think about it in this way. So I'm going to go back over the 3 steps. The first step is to write a big idea or conceptual relationship. The next step is to turn it into abstract conceptual questions. And the third step is to use fact-rich examples to illuminate the relationship. So here's your actionable idea if you want. You can think of fact-rich context that will illuminate the conceptual relationship. So whatever you wrote as your big idea, use my question stems to turn it into a question. And then what are some contexts that are going to illuminate the answer? And so let me give you this example of a health unit, a transformed health unit. A lot of people have like aha moments whenever I show them sort of a transformed unit. So the old me would have said, okay, I need to teach a unit on healthy eating. The first day, I'm going to have students explain the difference between foods with nutrients and foods without nutrients. Students will classify foods as predominantly carbohydrates, proteins, or fats. I'm just breaking it down for them. That's how I used to think about teaching. Students will analyze the impacts of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats on the human body. They'll describe the impacts of unhealthy eating and the steps to form better habits, and then they'll create action plans to make healthy eating choices. This is how I used to think about teaching, and I was like, yeah, I'm empowering these kids. This is going to be great. They can apply it to their lives. Now, here's how I think about it. I say, what is my big conceptual lens? I want to talk about healthy eating via choices and decision making. So I say, really what I want kids to understand is choice and decision making using the context of healthy eating. So my big idea I want them to understand is that healthy food choices can lead to a better life. So I'm not going to post that. I'm not going to tell them, hey, this is the big idea. I'm going to ask them, hey guys, how do choices about food impact our lives? And here's my inquiry cycles. I'm going to go through something they typically understand. Your physical shape and your weight is something that's impacted by your food choices. Another thing they don't understand is usually it's about energy. Like that sugar will give you a quick fix, but then you're going to crash. And so if you really want energy, it's better to eat a balanced diet. Here's something they really don't know about is that sleep and mood. Did you know that what you eat impacts your quality of sleep and your mood? So I'm getting a little bit more removed from their normal understanding about healthy food choices. And then I go through something even further, the immune system. How does your choices about food impact your immune system? So it's just a much richer and deeper unit than the previous way that I used to teach. And if you guys have any questions, please use the Q&A box, and I'll answer some questions at the end. So again, coming back to our big question, how do concepts impact retrieval of information, depth of understanding, and transfer of learning? I hope that you guys are getting better, sort of a better ability to answer that question. Here's my key points. Concepts organize information and enable easier retrieval. Abstract concepts, along with factual examples, are what facilitate deep learning. Conceptual relationships form the big ideas that transfer across situations. And so I want to just hear, what do you think about that? So I see a point from Linda. Why not tell them the goal? Identifying objectives has prepared students. That's a great question. And so this is something that's a little bit controversial about Erickson's work and about my work. I think it's better to use questions. We still need to tell them what quality work looks like. And so just to quickly answer your question, what I tell students in what is the chapter 2 of both of my books is the goal is the quality of your thinking. Let's look at quality thinking, and let's look at examples of bad thinking, and show them examples and non-examples, and make them see over time. I also use success criteria, so a learning objective and success criteria. So I have rubrics. If you go on my website, you can download a CBCI rubric. So I show them the rubrics to say, this is what you ultimately need to be able to do. This is our success criteria, without telling them exactly the big idea. So I'm still telling them what success looks like. I'm still telling them the ultimate goal is high quality thinking, deep conceptual understanding, backed by factual details. But I'm not going to tell you what the big idea is that we're exploring. So I'm just going to share a few pieces of research with you so you don't think that I've made this up. The reason experts remember more is that what novices see as separate pieces of information, experts see as organized sets of ideas. I think that's the best sentence in this entire publication by the National Research Council called How Students Learn. So this is kind of like how I picture this in the head. When I read about neuroscientists talking about kids learn, how kids learn, this is an oversimplified oversimplified version. I just want to acknowledge that I know that. It's just sort of how I like to picture it in my head. So what are these? These are neurons, and synapses are firing between the neurons. And so I sort of picture kids going around, just to go back to our previous example, with a recycle neuron in their head, with a rainforest neuron in their head, and with a habitat neuron in their head, but they're not connected. That's the problem. And how we connect them is with those big ideas, those conceptual relationships. Human actions lead to consequences on habitats. For example, when we recycle paper, less trees need to be cut down from the rainforest, protecting habitats for animals. And so we're connecting, making those connections in their heads with the big ideas. So back to my 3 steps, just to review. Write a big idea or conceptual relationship, turn it into an abstract conceptual question, and use fact-rich context to illuminate the relationship. So an actual idea that you guys can do is think of fact-rich context that will illuminate the conceptual relationship. And this is related to the research that John Hattie has done on what are the influences that most affect learning. So Hattie says there's surface learning, which is really important. There's deeper learning. And then when you do those things combined, you get transfer of learning. So here's what Hattie says is really important, and people can't miss this, is when you're doing surface level learning, if it's not related to a concept, then it's rote and kids will forget it. So we can still do surface level learning like I did with you all with the rainforest, but it was connected to a concept. So surface level, what is a rainforest? Here's an example of the Amazon. Here's another example of Borneo. Here's another example of Congo. These are examples of rainforest. What is a rainforest? So because I'm doing it, I'm sort of connecting Amazon, Borneo, and Congo to the concept of rainforest. That makes learning be able to go deeper. And Hattie says conceptual understandings form the coat hangers on which we interpret and assimilate new ideas and relate and extend them. So sort of like my file folder example I showed in the beginning, Hattie calls them coat hangers. We can hang facts on coat hangers of concepts or conceptual ideas. And so here's again is my visual. You take 2 concepts, you state them in relationship to each other, that makes a big idea. So big ideas are basically conceptual relationships. Just in case we have different teachers, I'm going to put some different examples here. Here's a math example. Equations, and the red is concepts. Equations represent relationships between parts and wholes in addition and subtraction situations. Here's an English one or even a world language one. I think I saw somebody who asked about world language. Vocabulary development improves reading comprehension. Here's one for science. Forces cause change. So they don't have to be very long. You've got 2 concepts stated in relationships. What's the relationship between forces and change? Forces cause change. Here's an art. I saw somebody ask about visual art. Art often portrays cultural heritage. Here's a technology one. Digital citizens curate information using a variety of tools to demonstrate meaningful conclusions. So here's just a bunch of examples I wanted to show you. And again, on my website, there's some examples, and I'll keep updating my website with more examples. This is some research from Meta and Fine on the deeper learning research theories. They say knowledge becomes deeper when you can use it not only to address a problem in the context in which it has been taught, but that you can also use it to understand or explain something in a different but related context. So I'm reading that, I'm reading how students learn, I'm reading the research of John Hattie, I'm working under Dr. Lynn Erickson, and this is how I came up with all this stuff. And so here's some examples. You can even use this for social emotional learning. I showed you guys in the beginning a picture of my kids, so I do this with them. Difficult situations help us learn and grow. I'm not going to just lecture that to my kids. I'm going to say, what's the role of difficult situations in our learning and growth? Or jump all the way to the bottom. When things don't go our way, we don't give up. We keep trying. You would say to students, what happens when things don't go our way? So that they're able to come up with a big idea. And so you can use different contexts. So even for social emotional learning, you can give them books, you can show them videos, you can do role plays, you can do teacher-created stories, you can make it up. One day there was a little girl who always focused on the negative parts of her life. She met a friend who showed her how to look at the positive things and be thankful for what you have, blah, blah, blah. This is the most powerful one, using real scenarios from yourself, or the next one is from their own lives. When they're quiet, when they're having a moment. When you shared your book with Lucy, how do you think it made her feel? Did it make you feel good to make another person happy? So you can use this, that would be a context to illustrate sharing with others makes them and me feel good. That's the big idea. So here's some additional ideas that are related to sort of more social emotional learning or even diversity education. Common elements of our own humanity can overpower our differences. Outsiders can use their narratives and rewrite the script of their destiny. In difficult times, art and music can heal and bring joy. Unique perspectives expand my worldview and enrich my life. So I wanted to share just some of these additional ideas with you to see that, like, this is my little conceptual inquiry cycle can apply to just about anything that we want to teach. So this is the last piece of research I'm going to leave you with, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the little poem. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. Leave them alone and they'll come home, wagging their tails behind them. Well, Perkins and Solomon have been doing research on transfer of learning since the 70s. And they say this Little Bo Peep is how theory of transfer is how most teachers approach it. That we just think kids are going to derive the big ideas and the principles that are behind whatever it is we're studying, and they're going to transfer it to new situations. What do they find? Unfortunately, considerable research and everyday experience testify that the Bo Peep theory is inordinately optimistic. It doesn't work. We have to be really clear about what the big ideas are, and we should use them for planning. So they call what is high road transfer and low road transfer. Sometimes they call it near and far transfer, you might see in some of the books you read. So low road or near transfer is similar tasks, and kids are pretty okay with that. But the more dissimilar the task becomes, the harder it is for kids to transfer their understanding. And so what they said in 1988, transfer always involves reflective thought in abstracting from one context and seeking connections with others. Transfer always involves reflective thought in abstracting from one context and seeking connections with others. And so these are my key points that I want to leave you guys with. Concepts organize information and enable easier retrieval. Abstract concepts along with factual examples are what facilitate deeper learning. Conceptual relationships form the big ideas that transfer across situations. And the last one, we must be crystal clear about these relationships. They should guide our planning. This is ultimately what we want students to know and do. Okay. I just want to show you a couple more things before I open it up for questions. So based on Perkins and Solomon's high road and low road transfer, my co-authors and I created this other dimension, the academic transfer and the real world transfer. And so what we want to do is sort of start off in the bottom left-hand quadrant. We want students to transfer their learning to highly similar school-related tasks, so that they get good at transferring. And then we slowly but surely ratchet it up to the right-hand upper quadrant. That's where innovation happens, when kids transfer their understanding to highly dissimilar real-world scenarios. And so I like to use this graphic when I'm planning as well to say, if I want kids to solve a huge problem like climate change, we got to slowly ratchet up the abstraction, and we got to slowly ratchet up the real-world connection. And so this is my 5-step sort of assessment tool that I've used Dr. Lynn Erickson, Dr. Susan Brookhart, and of course Wiggins and Matai from Understanding by Design. So you take the unit focus. What's your conceptual relationship that you want kids to understand? What's your engaging or novel scenario? I use Wiggins and Matai's grasp model for that. And then I use Susan Brookhart's scaffolding techniques to scaffold to get to higher order thinking. And then this is my own, just because I'm very passionate about it. Step 5, how will students take action? And so this is what I use to develop my assessment, so that students they're showing me they really understand it, they're applying it to a new scenario, and they're taking action. So these are my 3 steps that I want you guys to try out. What's your big idea or conceptual relationship? Turn it into an abstract question and use fact-rich context to illuminate the answer. And so if you want, you can email me and I can give you feedback to your plan. So I'm just going to leave it on this last slide as we open it up for Q&A. I have my website, my email, my Twitter handle. I hope some of you have been tweeting because I'm going to give away a book or a seat to my workshop. And then here's 2 workshops that are coming up, one in Melbourne and one in Washington, D.C. And I have a discount code here if you want 20% off of my books at quorum.com.
Great. Julie, thank you so much. I've really loved, you've had a very engaging group of participants in the chat box, which I know you've kind of seen and probably will get a chance to go back and see some of the comments, so that's fantastic. Before I ask the first question, this is a good time to remind everybody that if you wanted to get a professional development credit for this webinar, you should be able to download a PDF, the certificate now, within the platform, so long as you are logged into a desktop or laptop. If you're coming to us from a smartphone or a tablet, you will have to come back at a later date to download that PDF, and we'll send you a link back to getting into this webinar when it goes on demand in about an hour's time for those of you who are live. For those of you who are on demand, you will also get kind of a thank you email that you can keep in your records to always access this webinar. Okay, Julie, so I know you have worked with students for a number of years now, and I liked one of your slides where you were talking about your original thought process of teaching, and kind of as that horizontal line, and then how you've ended up changing your teaching with those circles and stuff like that. I'm wondering, when was an aha moment that you were onto something about this idea of using concepts and big ideas to transfer knowledge? Was there a moment when you were with your students that you saw this in practice?
That's a great question, Kelly. I think, I don't know, I mean, it wasn't like this, January 10th, 2000, whatever. But just over time, I first read Erickson's book in 2007, which now has a second edition out. And as a social studies teacher, that made perfect sense because I knew there were big ideas I wanted students to understand via the study of history. So when we study the American Revolution, there are big ideas I want them to take that they can transfer to other revolutions, for example. And so that was like as soon as I saw that. But then the more I read the actual research, and I saw there was a question about the research, I think the best place to go is the How Students Learn book. And you can download the PDF for free at www.nap.edu. That's the National Academies Press.edu. It's called How Students Learn Math, Science, History in the Classroom, and it's just based on profound research. And so when I read that, they talk about a conceptual framework. And so I shared with you some of the pieces of research. You might not see the words concept-based curriculum and instruction the way that Erickson puts it, but you'll see things like, I'm just going to jump back to this slide. Transfer always involves reflective thought and abstracting from one context and seeking connections with others. I see that as, wow, that's the connection to Erickson's work. She's talking about abstract ideas connecting to other contexts. And so when I started, the more that I read, the more, even like the Elon Musk article that I showed you guys in the beginning, you can see this over and over again, even if they don't use the words. Elon Musk used fundamental principles. So you get the fundamental principles of each discipline, and then you transfer them to other disciplines to innovate.
Great, thank you so much. So for those of you who are on this webinar and listening and who want to just kind of get started and they haven't maybe done some of this different concept-based learning, where would you recommend that they get started? I mean, certainly I think your book is helpful and the workshop was helpful, but if this is all new, where should a teacher begin?
So if you go to my website, you can see on the side I have different topics, and it says Stage 3 Concept-Based Curriculum and Instruction, and those are all my blog posts, me and my co-authors' blog posts on concept-based curriculum and instruction. And so if you're just getting started and you want something that's absolutely free, you go to my website, you go to the resources page, you go to all the blog posts on concept-based curriculum instruction, and you just start playing with it. You can also email me. If I have the time, I will prioritize you, and I will send you messages. And so, those are both free ways you can do it.
Excellent. And then another question that popped up, kind of a comment and question. Jason says, I always thought that the background that the child brings to tie the concept is really the context. Is that the case?
The background, can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll push this one to the slide. Oops.
The background that students bring to is the context.
Yeah. Yeah, I just pushed the slide. So
you know, I don't typically think about it like that. I think about the context being the sort of, and it depends. You know, I'm going to make a something that says a context in English is often text, like a poem or a short story. A context in social studies is often a case study or an example from history. A context in science is often like a lab or some sort of exploratory activity. So, you know, it depends on what it is. But the background knowledge students bring is super important. And what I typically do is think about contexts that are sort of closest to their understanding or easiest to access is the way I think about context. But again, I mean, people use different words. I just really want you to understand what I mean when I say the word context. But still, background knowledge is very important.
Great. We might have time for to squeeze two more questions in. I have one about just early year children that I'm going to push to the slide as well. How do you make an abstract concept into a tangible concept for early year children? And, you know, this is also helpful for me since I have 2 kids under the age of 5.
Oh, that's a great question. Early years, I'm about to blog on early years. I have a great blog in my head, and I'm ready to go. I just need the time to do it. So early years, I use the words, I say like an organizing idea, because they can often understand the notion of organizing. And almost everything in the early years is a concept. Color, letter, number, those are concepts. Dinosaur, if you happen to have a 3-year-old boy like I do, dinosaur is a concept. They're organizing ideas and they can see different examples. And so I sort of show them, I use the words organizing idea and examples. And so, you know, I have a lot of conversations with my kids about this. What makes something an organizing idea? What makes something a dinosaur? And so my kids love to say, you know, Mommy, look, this dinosaur has this particular feature, and that's what makes him a stegosaurus or whatever. And so I think that's, you know, what we have to think about for the young kids is really we're helping them, and everything at that age, we're helping them to organize the world around them. So it's a very, very natural process. The younger they are, the easier it is. When they start to reach 4th, 5th, 6th grade, they start thinking school is about memorization. And school is not about figuring out the world. And so with the older they get, the more we have to work on it. At a very young age, it's pretty natural and easy.
Wonderful. Julie, we have come to the end of our time. We've got several more webinars to go. For those of you again that are joining us on demand, please check out Share My Lesson, our professional development page, because we offer webinars live and on demand all throughout the year. Julie, this was really fantastic. Some great ideas, great concepts, thank you, and big ideas that you shared with us. So I'll give you kind of final word, and then I'm going to close this out and say thank you to everyone.
Awesome, thanks. You can email me. You can email webinars@sharemylesson.com. If we didn't answer your questions, you can go to where you registered, and there's a link to download my PowerPoint as well.
Wonderful. All right, to all of our educators who are tuning in, thank you, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Bye.